Hello, this is Lord S.K. Williams, and today I should like to address Lord Doomcock, the future ruler of Earth. I wish to preface this by saying that Doomcock is one of my favorite YouTubers. He is one of my favorite people to listen to in regards to pop culture, and I genuinely respect his opinion. Furthermore, I share his views on many topics regarding Star Trek and Star Wars, and believe that his videos are very insightful and have in fact helped me articulate some problems that I have had. But I do feel that I need to respond to one thing that he continually makes reference to in regards to a Star Trek Discovery, henceforth to be referred to as STD. You see, I don't like Star Trek Discovery any more so than Doomcock, and have even accepted his relabeling of the Klingons as Kling-Orcs, because they do look more like orcs than Klingons. I accept that his criticisms of the episodes are in fact genuine criticisms, and share most of these concerns as well. I don't think that the characters are particularly good, or that these stories are well written, or that it fits evenly in with the Star Trek timeline, and find some of the backpedaling now about it being an alternate timeline to be disingenuous. But with all of that said, Doomcock is, I believe, somewhat mistaken in one regard. And that happens to be his assessment of the STD Season 2 trailer. In it, we see Captain Christopher Pike. For the first time since The Menagerie, if you don't include the Abrams films, which technically is an alternate version of Pike and not the one from the Prime Universe. It can be argued that this is also an alternate version of Pike since it's apparently not the Prime Universe, but we're not getting into that. It's at least a main show within Star Trek. At any event, Doomcock complained about Christopher Pike's appearance in the STD trailer. You see, when we first met Pike, it was in the cage. Unless, of course, you were watching it in broadcast order, and then you watched him first in the Menagerie, because The Cage was the original pilot for Star Trek that, until late 80s or early 90s, was finally aired. But nonetheless, if you have seen The Cage or the Menagerie, you know who Christopher Pike is, and Doomcock says that the way Pike is portrayed in Discovery is another violation of canon. Pike is a weary, depressed man with the weight of command grinding at him. He is dour and serious and burned out. And yet, when Discovery shows him in his trailer, he's all smiles and happy and energetic and cracking jokes and far more engaging and energetic. This is a clear continuity violation based upon his character. Or is it? While it is true that the portrayal of Pike we get in the trailer, it differs from how we see him in the pilot, The Cage, and in subsequently the episode of the original series that used The Cage as its basis, The Menagerie, I believe that Doomcock is being unfair in this one criticism. And again, I'm not saying that to defend all of Star Trek Discovery, so if you want to bring up Michael Burnham's rotten personality, or Kling-Orcs having cloaking technology before they ought, or the spore drive and how nonsensical it is, or sonar in space, please don't. I agree that all of that's a problem. But just because all of that's a problem doesn't mean everything is. You see, Doomcock is making a mistake in assuming that what we saw of Pike in The Cage is reflective of Pike's personality overall. But, as with anything else, people are dynamic and ultimately change over time. Even if Christopher Pike in the cage actually had a personality that was dour and he was burned out and the weight of command had stripped him of his energy and made him somewhat depressive, that doesn't mean his personality could not change over time. Star Trek Discovery Season 1 is set 10 years before the original Star Trek. I don't know if that's a hard and fast number or an estimate, but for the sake of argument, I'm going to make it hard and fast. The Cage, on the other hand, was set 13 years before the original series. If it is true that Discovery is actually 10 years before and that wasn't an estimate, that gives Christopher Pike 3 years of time to develop a personality that is somewhat different. It doesn't have to be completely different, but he can boost his mood. And if the problem with Pike was that he was burned out or depressed, you can't get over that. And 3 years is more than enough time. And it is no more a contradiction in the timeline and in canon to have someone get over depression and become happier than to reveal that, say, 3 years before the Cage, Pike was a happy-go-lucky, easy-going, jokey guy. Perhaps Pike started out with a happy personality and is slowly, as command grinded away at him, it ate away at that and made him the depressive person. And I think that we should keep that in mind. Just because Pike was a depressive person who was burned out and grinded down and beaten down in the Cage doesn't mean he stayed that way afterward. He could have gotten his second wind and rediscovered his purpose and transformed over time. But you don't even need to go that far. You don't need 3 years. The truth is, when we first met Pike, we only saw him on one day. At least on the opening scenes. It's true that the Cage probably took place over several days, but the rest of it he was going through something unusual already. When we first meet him, when we get the impression of what kind of personality he has, it's only on that one day. And maybe Pike was feeling depressed that day. Maybe the weight of the world had grinded down on him. And it's obvious that this had been a problem because his doctor had come in. But Dr. Piper, the doctor on the Enterprise that Pike served with, acted as if this wasn't how Pike normally behaved. That this is something that had recently happened. I doubt that it's something that happened all at once on this day, but it's obvious that Pike wasn't always the man we saw. We don't know how long he had been like this or how long it took to get this way, but it could very easily have been something that happened over the last few months. Sure, his entire career in Starfleet could have contributed to it, and it may be true that the weight of command as captain would have contributed to it and perhaps helped over an even longer period of time, but maybe this burnout, this sense of depression was only a few weeks old and getting worse. Maybe this isn't how Pike normally was, even in the original series. The truth is, if you only have one episode of a man, you really can't tell what kind of man he is. People's personalities are revealed over a longer period of time and getting to know them. While it is true that in the 1960s, television shows tended to be more insular with their episodes, and that you could basically watch them in any order and understand what's happening, and they didn't really go through character growth like today's shows, it's still unwise to try and determine someone's personality based upon a single encounter with them. In fact, even Pike didn't act the same at the end of the episode as he did at the beginning. While at the beginning of The Cage, he was dour and depressive and crushed and almost defeated and burned out. After his encounter with the Telosians and all of the things he went through within The Cage, the very last scene of the episode set up a very different Pike. One that had been re-energized, one that had fallen in love with his Starfleet career again, one that cracked smiles and was happier. So even within the context of The Cage, his personality had changed somewhat. So I think Doomcock maybe a little harsh on Captain Pike in Discovery. I think that maybe he is allowing his hatred of Discovery to blind him to the possibility that this isn't really an error or a contradiction. And I've had this happen myself, and I think it happens to everyone, where you develop a negative feeling for something and you start applying that negative feeling beyond what is justified, finding greater fault than there actually is. And I feel that you see this quite often, say, in politics, where people who didn't vote for Donald Trump, for example, have magnified him into a greater evil than he actually is. And you see the same with Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama with the other side of the field. Or look at the atheist community and how it goes off against the Bible, where they've decided that Christianity is evil and the Bible is horrible, and they've decided to take every given passage and distort it beyond any recognition. So, let's be perfectly honest. People do this all the time, and it's a very human flaw, but I feel it's one that we should recognize and perhaps work against. I don't really think the portrayal of Pike, as we saw in the trailers, contradicts the Cage. He has had 3 years to undergo a revision of his outlook and a renewal of his personality. He has had 3 years to overcome his depression, a depression we already saw him overcoming in the Cage. And we don't really know how he was on a day-to-day basis. Had Star Trek gone off the way it was originally planned to, we would have, because we would have never gotten Captain Kirk. We would have instead had the adventures of Christopher Pike and the adventures of the crew that we saw in the Cage, where number 1 was a woman and Spock was a lieutenant. We would have gotten that. That would have been Star Trek. And I don't know how Pike would have been written had CBS picked up Star Trek and carried it from the first pilot onward, rather than asking for a second pilot and revisions to the concept. For all we know, Pike's personality, as well as all the others, would have changed, and in fact, that typically does happen. Television shows often produce pilots that differ from what we get. Normally, the differences aren't radical, but they are there. Even excellent shows that are pre-planned from the beginning with fixed story arcs have this. If you rewatch Babylon 5's pilot, for example, while the characters still have the same essential character and personality, there are differences in how they behave between the pilot movie and the regular series. And that's Babylon 5, a series that had a single story to tell where everything was basically planned out from the beginning. And with all the other Star Treks, we get this as well, with the exception of Enterprise, surprisingly, where the characters are introduced in a sort of raw form for the pilot, but over time we see developments of the characters so that the writers settle into a slightly different view, toning down certain aspects, amplifying others, dropping certain traits. We don't really know how Captain Christopher Pike would have been portrayed had Star Trek gone ahead from that original pilot, instead of picking up Captain Kirk in his adventures. So I feel Doomcock may be a little off base on this one criticism. There are a few other things I disagree with him on, but not as major as this one. You see, this one involves a major character and seems to be a sticking point for him. And while I still respect his opinion greatly, and I still view most of what he says as actually true, I did feel like making this video to express my own views on Star Trek and on Star Trek Discovery. I don't really have much else to say, so I'll be signing off now. Remember, as the good book says, wisdom is the principal thing. That is Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7. Thank you. God bless, and goodbye.